Hello, my name is Jeff. This is Consultation, your 2A self-defense law network. But what we do is we help people understand the law of self-defense in the simplest terms possible. We take the fear out of getting it wrong. I got an interesting email this week, and the topic really was MMA instructors or martial art instructors and how they really teach people. As you know, this summer I went to 8 firearms instructors and found out that what they are teaching about self-defense law is exceedingly bad. So I want to get into MMA instructors and senseis. What they're also doing is teaching people to do certain moves that will incapacitate people or use non-proportional force, where they will escalate the force just to make control of whatever situation that needs to be. It's going to land you in jail. I'm going to try to get through this as quick as possible. You see here is a use of force model. I am not a big fan of use of force model because that is usually what the police are doing. As you see over here, an officer response category. So there's different levels of force: resistant passive, resistant aggressive, assault, bodily harm, and seriously bodily harm and or death. So there's going to be different variations of that. Every time you go up to the next level, you lose your innocent standard. All right, you become a willing participant. Mutual combat ensues, and therefore you lose your legal right to defend yourself. All right. So by that time, if you have lost your innocent standard, you don't have a legal standing to claim self-defense, you may fall into what I call you may qualify for a lesser charge, maybe a manslaughter charge for an imperfect self-defense. If you get into it at all, Minnesota does not recognize imperfect self-defense, so you have to be really careful with your jurisdiction, okay? Minnesota does not allow for imperfect self-defense. What I have noticed over the years that there are people who are black belts, mixed martial artists, who learn these moves from these senseis, and they're using too much force. When someone shoves you, you basically can only shove them back. You can't get into some judo move that, 2-3 moves later, and he's passed out on the ground while drilling on himself. That is way too much force. All you really can do is use proportional force and shove them off. If you look, there are several cases of MMA fighters are getting into trouble for certain scenarios because once the prosecutor has recognized that these guys are MMA fighters, well, are your hands now a dangerous weapon? I don't know. That is something that you need to take a look at, and it's something that you need to consider if you are, all right? If you are going against a 23-year-old person and you are a 23-year-old MMA fighter that has 50 bouts under their belt, that division of ability is going to put you on the negative side. And if the person that you are going against has knowledge that you are an MMA fighter or some kind of a black belt, he can use deadly force more readily, but he has to prove that he knows this information before the fight exists. So I can go through all these news reports of MMA fighters are getting into trouble, and you get into a lot of problem. All we have to do is look into the great state of Minnesota, where I'm at. All right. What happened is a boxer who got arrested because in the trial court, the judge determined that his left hand, not his right hand, but his left hand was a dangerous weapon, and he was convicted of a second-degree assault. I'm not going to get into assault and battery and different levels of that. Assault is that you threaten to cause some kind of a harm, of bodily harm or death, whatever. Battery is in other states, not in Minnesota, but battery is in other states where you made some kind of a physical touch of some sort. With the degrees, if your state has a degree, Like Minnesota, degrees 1 through 5, it's going to be different levels of force. Now, second degree assault is where you are touching each other. And Jack Allen Bastine, who was a professional fighter for 20 years, clocked this guy twice. Again, when we're dealing with court cases, it's not a very clean case. Okay, he did have a gun, and he was not able to have a gun. I'm not going to get into all those little particulars of it, but what this actually did is that even 2 hits in Minnesota, they said that his left hand was a dangerous weapon. Later, the Minnesota Supreme Court said no, just hitting the guy twice is not a deadly threat, even if he was a professional fighter. Now, if he continued on pummeling the person, yes, it could have been a deadly threat, and that goes toward anyone. If you have somebody down on the ground and ground and pound MMA style, just left, right into the head, where you're using the entire planet Earth as a battering ram with your hand, yes, that is a deadly force event. So what the Minnesota Supreme Court is basically saying, yeah, two punches does not constitute a deadly force threat. All right. So even though that there was other warts in the system, the Minnesota Supreme Court reversed his second degree conviction and went down to a third degree conviction. So if you're an MMA fighter, okay, and you are a martial artist, you really need to know immediacy and proportional force. Those are going to be the 2 greatest things that you need to be aware of. Now, I listened online on a Facebook page where an MMA trainer of some sort was basically given the A-OK to just ground and pound somebody because they might have a gun. If someone is going for your hat, you have to assume they have a knife on you also, and you have to just obliterate them. I would like to say this. There is a segment in society saying that if someone takes my hat, I'm just going to ground them and just make them absolutely sorry because of the possibility that they have a gun or a knife or whatever. Well, why wait till someone takes a hat off you? How about if someone makes a snarling gesture toward you? Maybe trying to provoke you. Maybe beefing up a little bit. Well, that guy could have a knife. Why don't you just ground and pound him? Why not? I mean, the simple act of taking a hat off you could be an assault charge. Could be a theft charge. Whatever it is, that person has already lost his innocent standard. But the thing about it is, if you escalate it at that point, which is an ordinary force, to a deadly force scenario where you're on the ground pounding them because of the possibility of the knife, the law doesn't recognize that you have a right to ground and pound somebody if they went for your hat because of the possibility of the knife. Now, if they did a furtive movement where they are reaching for back for a knife or their pocket or doing something that, or even if they said, oh, wait a minute, let me reach in my pocket and I got a knife, then you can assume that they do have a knife between furtive movement and them actually giving out jeopardy, saying that they have a knife. Yeah, now you can ground and pound them. You don't have to wait for that knife to come out. You don't have to wait till that knife is 2 inches into you. You can defend yourself if it is reasonable to do so at that time. Now, the other narrative that we get a lot from this type of individual, and I heard it a lot. I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Okay? Most of you guys have heard that. They would rather hear let a jury defend their innocence or guilt by what their narrative is than be carried by 6. I hate this saying because it assumes that if you follow the law it is automatically going to get you killed. And that is simply not true by the narrative that we just gave. Because if you think that every altercation of ordinary force that you get into is going to end up with a hidden knife 6 inches into your belly, is wrong. Is absolutely wrong. In a polite society, I don't give a crap. That is wrong, and you will go to jail probably for the rest of your life if you assume this. Okay, the other, and this, what I talk about intent. Look, there's actually a T-shirt out there. Let's say you put this T-shirt out on there. What is your intent? Do you want to get into a use of force event? If somebody shoves you, or let's just say that they were at a bar and it was a crowded bar and someone tripped on your shoe, you were basically assaulted at that point. Are you going to turn around and just because that happened, maybe the guy turned around and say, "Hey, jackhole, stick your foot in"? Does that give you a right to assume that that person has a knife and you're going to be sticking them on the floor and ground and pound them? No. This is your intent. Are the broccoli stalks on that jury? Is the finder of fact going to say, "Hey, this guy is wearing this T-shirt"? Why? Because that basically says, I don't give a shit what the law says, because I'm going to let the jury decide if I am guilty or not. Now let's go to jury nullification. Here is the definition of jury nullification. Basically, in the past, it was, I use Rosa Parks as a good thing. She died, what, 15, 17 years ago? And Rosa Parks was a woman in Detroit who refused to go to the back of the bus because of a black-white situation where she sat in the front of the bus. Yes, technically the law at the time was that a black woman needed to be going to the back of the bus. I would like to think that I would not enforce that law. If the prosecutor in the state took this woman to task about this and was going to put her in jail because she defied this unjust law, yes, that's what jury nullification does. It didn't hurt anybody. Another thing is weed laws. Weed, and you can debate if weed hurts other people or drugs hurt other people, but usually taking drugs, weed, doesn't hurt anyone else. Yeah, I get the downstream effect, but that is the biggest thing. Is the jury going to say, "Hey, this person was just smoking weed. I'm not going to put him in jail for 18 months or 9 months or whatever the time is. I'm not going to do that." But with self-defense, it isn't. You may have killed somebody. The law will never allow your lawyer to stand up and say jury nullification. It's not going to happen. You will not be able to present to the jury and say, "Hey, there's something called jury nullification, and if you believe that this law is unjust, you can say, no, not guilty." All right? I know that to be true because I know about jury nullification. If the judge asks the jury, they give a bunch of questions, and they say, basically, that you are the finder of fact, but the judge will tell you how to apply the law, and you can't go outside that scope. You can't, by that definition, there is no jury nullification, even though that I would still participate in jury nullification. I don't give a crap what the judge says. I am the finder of fact, and I am the finder if the law is just or not. All right? So when we go through this entire scenario of MMA fighters getting into trouble, their senseis, their masters, teaching them moves to break bones, to cause a physical injury, or to incapacitate them in some manner because of a slight brush or whatever the situation will be. I'm going to be very specific. There is ordinary force and there's deadly force, okay? There is shades of gray. There is degrees of ordinary force. a poke in the chest is much different than trying to push someone out the door. Does that agree? But deadly force, there isn't a degree, there isn't a breadth and scope when it comes to deadly force. Deadly force is deadly force, whether it is a knife, whether it is 20 fists to the head while the person is down on the ground, a car, whatever the instrument is, that if it is likely or intended to cause death or great bodily harm, that's the key right there. All right? So when we go through this thing, no matter who teaches you, the senseis, the masters, the MMA fighters who are getting into all these troubles, you got to be aware of proportional force. You got to be aware that the person who is training you in MMA fighting, do you want them on the jury to explain to the broccoli stalks on the jury that couldn't get out of jury duty, the chronically unemployed, that this person who you are following did it right? Do they have the street cred? Do they have the gravitas to convince a soccer mom what you did was right and true? My name is Jeff. This is 2A Self-Defense Law. I hope this helped.